Okay, thank you so much for the nice introduction. And first of all, I will just point to the, I don't know, the problem with the day. Yeah, so it seems like some of us, we were working with an earlier arrangement. Yeah. So basically, the presentation is based on work which I do closely with Michaela Pelican. But this presentation, of course, is going to focus more on the debate surrounding human trafficking in Cameroon within the context of migration from Cameroon to countries in the Gulf state. Yeah. And the presentation is divided into three main sections. So first, there is a general background introduction, which also include the objectives and the method. Then there is the second part of it, which looks at the gender dynamics in human trafficking. This is the core of the presentation. And in it, I will try to highlight the gender pattern of migration from Cameroon to the Gulf state. Then also the structural factors which result in specific form of labor exploitation and abuse of a migrant based on their gender. So that is, women face specific forms of exploitation, which is different from men. And the focus, a lot of the focus would be on the experience of women. Then in the last section, I will, of course, look at some of the reflect on some of the main findings, kind of argument, and then go on with to a concluding remark. And the presentation will basically focus on the first objective, which is to examine the gender dynamics in human trafficking, focusing on its impact on different categories of people, specifically women. Then this third objective, to identify the micro and macro practices and structures that sustain human trafficking. So the second objective, I will not go into that. Yeah. Then, as far as the research is concerned, how it was conducted. So basically, we've done like a repeated research stays in Cameroon since 2015, and also specifically in the United Arab Emirates. So 2015, 2020, 2022, and 2023. And our approach is mostly qualitative. And in this, we combine, I would say, participant observation, interviews, document and policy analysis. And we work very closely with the migrants who are the target of our studies. And we try to work with them in a collaborative arrangement whereby I don't know, whenever there are opportunities, we give the opportunities to actively engage with them in what we kind of describe as a active collaboration in knowledge production. And so at the core of the presentation, human trafficking. So what is it about? Yeah. So basically the very idea of our approach or notion of human trafficking is grounded in the Palermo Protocol. This is a legal framework for combating human trafficking worldwide, established by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in November of 2000. The core element and purpose of this definition, that is the various aspects that constitute human trafficking. There are three of them. So one, there is an action which has to do with recruitment, transportation, transfer, or harboring. Then there is the means, which is a threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, abduction, and so on. And then finally, there is the purpose. You know, why go through all this trouble? So it has to, there has to be the element of exploitation. So these three components in the Palermo Protocol define what we are referring here as a human trafficking. But the most important thing, while the Palermo Protocol is just one treaty. It is part of a broader convention, and that's the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. And this convention has 3 treaties. The second one is the treaty or the Convention Against Human Smuggling. And the reason I brought that in is because I will touch on it a little bit. Then the third one is the Convention Against, I think, the manufacture and trafficking in firearms. But that one doesn't concern, or the important thing is they are interconnected. So when you're talking about human trafficking, it has elements of the other conventions in it. Then, of course, now we start to look at the role of women in human trafficking, the multiple roles. And in this conversation, I will try to flesh out some of those gender dynamics. Yeah. So first, we see that migration from Cameroon to the Gulf state follows a gender pattern. Yeah. So women, usually we have women in their 20s and 30s migrating to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, while men and women, migrate to the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. Yeah. And in this arrangement, both the women migrating to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are usually recruited directly from Cameroon, and they are channeled into a specific sector of the labor market, and that is domestic work. Yeah. Then, of course, just to say something about those who migrate to the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. So while men and women migrate to the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, they often go there independently on a tourist visa, and while there, they try to find employment and get a work permit. Yeah. And they work in various sectors, including domestic work for women. But besides that, they work in different sectors of the economy. Yeah. Then women are also involved. The second picture which just came up is an organization of women, an NGO called Survivors Network. It is made up of women who are returnees from Kuwait and Qatar, and they were, they experienced trafficking, labor exploitation and coercion, and they see themselves as survivors. Yeah. And presently in the organization, they work closely to sensitize the public about the dangers of human trafficking and how not to become a victim. And they do so in collaboration with other organizations internationally. Yeah. Then women are also involved in more of the sensitization campaign. And the example, the third picture now is in Cameroon, like generally, there is an annual award, provided by the United States Department, the U.S. Department of State, and it is called the Trafficking in Persons Heroes Report Award. Yeah, for those who have done outstanding work in fighting against human trafficking. Since 2004, there has been about 140 awards given to individuals from different parts of the world, about 25 of them from Africa, and 3 of them are women from Cameroon. So again, it highlights the role of women in fighting human trafficking in Cameroon. Then the next slide, migration regulation in the Gulf states. So here I try to look at some of the structural factors, that creates the condition for exploitation that affects men and women differently. So first, migration regulation in the Gulf state is described as a sponsorship. Locally, it is called the kafala, and you can define it as a guest worker scheme, which is focused on the recruitment of a labor migrant. So the has very specific elements in it, which I like to highlight. First is the temporality of labor migration. So there is always this aspect like is for short terms. And the implication of the temporality is that usually with the kind of conditions or exploitation which migrants face, they have very little time to, I don't know, organize and think of a long-term strategy to fight against these forms of exploitation and abuse. Yeah. Then second, migrant entry, their stay and exit is tied to employment. So basically, the moment you lose your employment, then you also lose your residence permit. You are expected to return to your home country. And then second, the state has delegated much of the responsibility of regulating migrants' stay in the country to individual citizens. And those are like their employers, or those who are considered sponsors. Yeah. And because of this arrangement, so employers have so much power over migrants, because in case of you losing your job, for example, you lose your right to stay in the country. Yeah. And then specifically why all these aspects affect, I would say, all migrants, the last aspect which I want to point to, that's the exemption of domestic work from labor laws. Yeah. This specifically affects female migrants, because when we look at the gender pattern of migration, which I presented from Cameroon, you see that only women are directed towards domestic work. Yeah. So which means whatever is happening to domestic workers is affecting more of the female migrants from Cameroon than their male counterparts. Then I think I will skip this slide. Yeah. Then to show again the conditions, because of course with the structural conditions that create or increases the vulnerability of female migrants, there are also, I would say, practices at the micro level, which kind of reinforce some of those macro or structural vulnerabilities. Yeah. So, and I'll do this by highlighting these two case studies. So the first one is a woman, and I call her Mira, and she migrated to Kuwait. She was recruited by her pastor. The pastor lied to her about the job in Kuwait. He withheld all relevant information. And one of the important things about the kafala system is that the employer is by law is required to pay for the travel costs and visa costs of the migrant worker. So what happens is that since you have migration brokers involved, so the migration brokers are the people who the employers deal with. So in this case, the pastor received money to cover this cost, that he pocketed the money and then asked Mira to pay for the cost of migration and visa processing, yeah, which is very typical to all the other domestic workers who are employed. Yeah. Then the employer in Kuwait, after she arrived in Kuwait, confiscated her passport, forced her to work for 15 hours or more daily, and she experienced all sorts of physical and verbal abuse. Yeah. And already from her case study, we can start seeing how the various elements which constitute human trafficking fit. So first, there is the element of recruitment, yeah, because earlier we talked about the means, yeah. So she was recruited through deception, yeah. Then there is also the element of exploitation, yeah. So the means, and she was transported across borders. So the various elements that constitute human trafficking fits very well in Mira's case, yeah. And in the second case of Obi, this is a man who migrated from Cameroon to the United Arab Emirates. And in his case, he sought the service of a migration broker. So he paid the broker to take him to the United Arab Emirates. But then when he arrived at the airport, he was not allowed to enter the country because they found out that his passport was, no, his visa was a forgery. Yeah. And in most countries, of course, immediately you'll be arrested, detained, and then deported. But in the UAE, it's a bit, he was allowed, they just informed him that his passport was a forgery. So he spent about 2 weeks at the airport, found a way to get an authentic visa, which was a tourist visa. Yeah. And in his case also, you see like what happened fits in with the definition of human smuggling. Yeah, I did not go into the definition of human smuggling, but when you look at the Palermo Protocol, this is what human smuggling has to do with, paying the services or willfully participating in the illegal border crossing to another country. Yeah, and often through the use of a third party. Yeah, and both his case and the case of Mira, whether it's human trafficking or human smuggling, they are punishable. Yeah, so the Palermo Protocol itself demands that these two cases should be punished. Yeah. But then in the case of Obi, but the two cases, what they have in common is like they both they were lied to by their brokers. Then, of course, that also increased their vulnerability. But unlike Mira's case, when Obi finally had access to the UAE, he struggled in the beginning. He was homeless, but eventually he made it. He found a good job, and he was even like he managed to achieve upward mobility and was really successful. Yeah. Okay. So the key findings, I will discuss the second. Yeah. So Mira's experience, as I explained, aligns closely with the Palermo Protocol definition, and in the same way, Obi's case aligns with the definition of human smuggling. But in both cases, nothing was done. Yeah, no one was prosecuted, and the regimes, both in Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates, did not even try to follow up on these cases, even though officials were informed, all the people who were in the position to take actions were informed, but nothing happened. And then it raises the question then of, first of all, the challenge of implementing the Palermo Protocol in practice. And if it is so difficult to implement, so what are the implications? Yeah, so these are some of the questions which I think the rest of the paper or analysis tries to address. And then, of course, the conclusion I make from this is that while migrant interactions, yeah, we have structural factors which create conditions of vulnerability for the exploitation of migrant and abuse. And those factors kind of interact with everyday practices, which involve, individual actors that help to reinforce the macro forces of exploitation to create a form of extreme and cohesive form of labor exploitation for migrants, despite the very nice Palermo Protocol, which is there to prevent this from happening. Thank you.